You two go with him.
You mean you want us to go in?
Seal the door with lumber, oil drums, anything you can find.
That's better. Easy now. Give him time to get there. Pat, I want a picture. You get back with the rest. Don't be silly. That'll cost you a drink, Scotty. Buy him a beer. Ready, Bob? No, but go ahead and open it.
Alien here. Have you ever sought to understand the inexplicable and devastatingly harmful, such as, say, natural disaster, war, or famine, or any of those tragedies that might lead to the deaths of millions, or even perhaps those more singular misfortunes that might lead to the loss of that one person that gave your entire life its meaning? Well, have I found the answer for you. God wills it, accept it, get over it. That's right, you guessed it. It's time to talk about your organized Christian religion.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost.
But first, the little backstory that led me to my conclusion. Like many views or interpretations of those views, mine, just as with any other being in existence, are rooted in my own experiences and circumstances, and thus we can ask along together. 1. Was I sent from a faraway world, from a different timeline, to observe you on your planet Earth, albeit, mind you, in as transparent a manner as possible? Yes. Check. 2. While I am observing and reporting, am I able to survive on your planet with reasonable accommodation? Why, yes, with reasonable accommodation, I can. Absolutely. 3. Did the appropriate parties offer me such accommodation for my stay, and did I subsequently accept? Yes, and yes. Bingo, check again. And for the most pertinent question in this line of inquiry. 4. When these reasonable accommodations became unreasonable, when, in the dead of winter, the climate controls in the housing situation I was set up in went out and no attempts were made to fix them. Weeks on in, despite my requests, was I able to withstand, excel even, in your below freezing temperatures? Surprisingly, you might find, just like any of your own fleshly kind, in this situation, I was not. And yes, before you ask, I did still have my interdimensional travel suit at the time, but what your human brain cannot grasp is how much of this suit's mechanics, as much of my own species' higher technology, is reliant entirely on its time-traveling functions. Stuck in your, air quotes, real time, the thing is entirely useless. And with my mission still ongoing, I had no option to go home. In all honesty, if there had been such an option, I might still have chosen to freeze. But anyway, despite all expectations, despite full knowledge of my special contracts and agreements, the leasing office I was assigned to tried to make my issue a government USCIS office problem. The USCIS office, or more specifically, the Visa Office, and by extension, even the Department of Defense, made it a leasing office issue. Damn those government contracts. And damn those private contracts with government-subsidized corporations. In short, I was left to suffer the freezing temperatures of your world. But my plight did not go entirely unnoticed by one or two of my earthly acquaintances, one of whom, perhaps in a spirit of encouragement, or even contrarily, perhaps in a direct attempt to break my spirits and send me packing, handed me the following virtual track or daily devotional. Are you going through a severe trial today? The text began. If so, your mind must settle certain issues. First, your reaction to the trial should be one of joy, for the testing of your faith develops perseverance. James chapter 1, verses 2 through 3. Rejoice when trials come your way, because without a test, there can be no testimony. And thus my own journey and exploration into this particular theology began. Joy at freezing?
Spread out, everybody. We're going to try to figure out the shape of this thing. Here's the tools, sir.
Tell me what all this means. I think it's the question people are asking.
I stopped at this first paragraph and immediately searched for the verses referenced. James chapter 1, verses 2 through 3. New International Version. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Now, what initially struck me here was how this passage differs, at least on one point, from other translations of the same passage. James chapter 1, verses 2 through 3. King James Version. My brethren, count it all joy when ye fall into diverse temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. The words trial and temptation are not, in each sense of the word, compatible. If by trial the intended meaning is, say, a period in which one is subject to the desire to sin or do ill, then the word is easily interchangeable with temptation. However, if by trial the intended meaning is, say, a period of difficulty which has no relation to any such desire towards wrongdoing, obviously then it is not so easily interchangeable with temptation.
When you're in the trial, when you're in the trouble, when you're being tempted and you don't know what to do, and it seems like you scan the horizon and your little ship is nowhere to be seen, ask God for wisdom.
Adding further to the problem, the connotation of this trial or temptation appears to change from version to version, from any trial or temptation to trials or temptations that prove faith.
Что ты...
With such potential obstacles in the way of broad interpretation here, it would seem fair to urge caution when trying to approach the exact meaning of such writings. Nevertheless, leaving any such caution behind, the devotional makes at least one assumption where it is left unclear in these verses, that any significant struggle you might face, the kind you might face in any given day, is in fact a trial of faith. In the original passage, the connection between trials of faith and cause for rejoicing does seem clear, but the devotional takes a step further from what is obvious to try and establish the interpretation that suffering itself is a cause for joy. And added to this, the devotional continues, noting all your earthly difficulties are simply adding jewels to your eternal crown and reward. That is a life-changing way to look at trials, now isn't it? Oh yes, absolutely life-changing, because if I were to be included as a part of this Christian faith and am left, as I most certainly was before, through earthly incompetence, subject to the cold, I get a heavenly reward for suffering said incompetence, all because it can somehow be construed in one form or fashion as a test of faith, and as such, I should feel ecstasy and pure joy even when left shivering, unsheltered from your cold.
Count it all joy, celebrate, be happy, jump up and down, dance.
Oh, but we don't stop there. As the devotional continues, finally, you should never blame God for all your trials. He only gives you what is good. Maybe my brain is all mixed up from my prior freezing ordeals, but this certainly seems like a complete contradiction to the message conveyed in the prior passages of the devotional. If the key to feeling joy in suffering lies in the realization that said suffering is somehow divine, or rather a test of faith, how can it thus be totally removed from the subject of that faith, namely, faith in God? In fact, the qualifier, all, in the aforementioned section of the devotional, you should never blame God for all your trials, would certainly seem to imply that you should very much blame God for some of your trials. And if God only gives you what is good, it then takes little stretch of the imagination to come to the idea that suffering itself is good, at least in the context of this faith. If you are supposed to feel such excessive amounts of joy in the face of suffering, indeed, if you are required by faith to do so, how can suffering not be construed as a good?
That tells me right now that when I'm facing a difficulty, I have a choice. I can consider it joy, or I can consider it hardship.
And thus, in the context in which it was given to me, I myself wondered if the message I was supposed to take away from the devotional is that what I was experiencing at the direct hands of incompetence was in actuality not due to incompetence at all. The people who failed to do their job were actually doing a good thing, even perhaps competently fulfilling God's gracious will by leaving me exposed to the cold. And somehow, I was supposed to take this all as encouragement, as uplifting. I think not. The summary of the matter, the devotional comes to a close. Trials are working in your character. They are temporary. One day you will be on the other side of the trial, saying to yourself, as the psalmist said, "Now I can rest again, for the Lord has been good to me." Psalm 116, verse 7. That's right. Trials are temporary, especially if you are left in freezing temperatures to die of pneumonia or the alien equivalent. But in all seriousness, all this has pointed me to one significant conclusion. The inability of this kind of Christianity to address the true nature of suffering. It certainly seems quite blatantly to deny harm as harmful, which is certainly not an uncommon practice amongst your kind through your various belief systems. And, if I might also add, what a shallow faith one must have indeed, if one must construe any even remotely significant form of hardship as a test of that same faith.
Until the Lord moves you, you're to bloom right where you're planted.
Lord, if you want me to do something else, show me. If you don't want me to have children, so be it. But you're my God.
But leaving my own past and temporary plight behind, there are plenty more nasty implications left behind with this devotional. Pointing to the final passage here, there is a significant problem with this idea that trials are temporary, and that one day you, no matter who the you could be that would read said devotional, you will get on the other side of those trials.
But I think it's best to remember
Well, what
James
does it mean
said.
then to count it all
Count it
joy?
all joy.
If you are dealing with the casual trial of one individual day, perhaps you will. But the reality of hardship in this life, even for us aliens, is that there are some trials or harms which last our entire lifetimes. But to someone thus struggling or harmed, your kind, equipped with such a Christian view, are apparently only capable of telling such a person to be glad, to rejoice in their suffering. Indeed, such Christian people seem to find it their duty to do as such, ignoring any key context, as I guess should naturally be the case, because, of course, even the namesake of the religion, that Messiah of this Christianity, when he was believed to be present on your earth, is said to have spent his time not healing the sick, feeding the hungry, or clothing the poor, but telling those who suffered that they should be happy and glad to be right where they were, sick, hungry, and unsheltered, because it was for their own good, just as it is apparently good for any of you today to be sick or go hungry or unsheltered. And of course, it was certainly the case that throughout his own trials, according to this same biblical account, Jesus smiled the brightest smile, even whilst being tortured. And never, ever did Jesus even weep. Perhaps it is no wonder then that such Christian views are incapable of answering those questions posed by its detractors. How could a good God allow suffering? Just as the atheist would seek to blame God for the presence of suffering in your world or mine if he were to exist, such Christian views arguably equally blame their God for that same suffering. Only, however, they do so while construing suffering as a good through the guise of trials of faith. What I find odd, although it might only be attributed to my alien intellect being unable to grasp your belief systems, is how the idea that your Earth, or even the greater universe, is not a perfect place, is left off the table when it comes to debates about the existence of God and his possible relation to suffering. Equally baffling is how the fact that intelligent beings of all kinds choose to do each other harm is so blatantly ignored when it comes to discussions of evil, as if a God could only be good if he impeded the nature of free will by intervening in every individual's attempt to do harm. But in light of the views put forward in the devotional in question, I am not certain such a Christian worldview is capable of acknowledging right or wrongdoing on the part of your kind beyond your choice to rejoice or not rejoice in life when you are in pain.
When I'm facing a difficulty, I have a choice. I can consider it joy, or I can consider it hardship.
Celebrate, be happy, jump up and down, dance.
When it comes to evil, however, another speculative thought formed in my own mind that seems never to have been touched on in such human theology. Digging in just a little deeper here, if the Christian God were real, if the myths and legends of the Christian scriptures were true, is it also not possible that both good and evil themselves, not choices to do good or evil on our parts, but good and evil themselves, are innate to the universe, separate even in some form or fashion from such a God? When I investigated your Christian scriptures on the matter in its different English translations, for sadly I have no thorough knowledge of any of your other earthly languages, I found no reference to this God's creation of good and evil, only the placement of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the middle of the Garden of Eden alongside the tree of life. Nevertheless, whatever greater speculations might be made about the nature of evil and suffering, they are all put aside here. And of course, still left uncomforted is my poor alien self, freezing my multi-dimensionally traveling ass off, or at least so I was in weeks prior. But then there is your own humankind, strewn constantly aside by your alleged righteous, because they will not smile at their own pain, or see the ungodly evil done them as a holy good provided from above.
Well, I really don't want to sound negative, but I'm getting sick and tired of all the negative talk going on in the world today.
And thus we see, or at least almost see a form of victim blaming construed as a form of comfort. Perhaps this is why those who count themselves amongst this Christian faith, if they do not turn away entirely from such a faith, choose to forsake fellowship with others of that same faith, because taking hardship or the need for comfort and turning it back on those facing difficulties or needs does not exactly amount to friendly association, whatever the intention might be.
So when I talk about Christian fellowship as a means of perseverance, the fellowship I have in mind is this mutual bond. And I think,
in fact, I might even argue that telling others in the face of their trials that they should rejoice at their troubles, or that such hardships will simply pass, that is to say, that they will get over them, is not very friendly at all. But sadly, however, once such individuals turn away from such a brand of Christianity, they will not find much comfort in any other popular, majority, or in-group human perspectives either.
Yeah, fuck you too!
Alien out.
Worry about? No, but go ahead and open it.